Greetings, my brothers and sisters. Sending gratitude to all of you who are joining in today to accompany us down the rabbit hole of self-exploration through plant medicines. My name is Ryan Sprague, and I'm here to tell you that your frequency is now set and tuned to explore psychedelic medicines and the impact they've made among the countless psychonauts exploring the last true frontier. Buy a ticket and take the ride with me as we get true first-hand accounts of the experiences, benefits, risks, and transformations taking place within the ever-expanding world of psychedelic medicines on This One Time on Psychedelics. One thing I imagine we can all agree on when it comes to the realm of psychedelics and plant medicines is that it is up to each one of us to be the change, so to speak, within this realm. For a subject that has been controversial for so long and has the ability to offer so much support in the human experience when done in the proper context, or do so much damage when done without proper awareness of the potency associated with these medicines, it is by each of us showing the world what conscious, responsible consumption of these medicines looks like that we can begin to shift the narrative more and more. Today's guest on the show is a man who has made it his life's work to be at the forefront of the change that is so desperately needed within the long-held mainstream narrative surrounding these sacred allies. He is the founder of not one, but two psychedelic-focused companies, including Synthesis, which is focused on allowing individuals to have direct experiences with medicines such as psilocybin truffles in safe containers to gain insight on their experience of life, and Third Wave, which is focused on building an educational platform to ensure psychedelic substances become responsibly integrated into our cultural framework. Currently, Third Wave offers long-form psychedelic guides, online microdosing programs, an industry-best network of clinics and retreat providers, and an incredible podcast to allow individuals to continue learning and gaining awareness around this space. And in today's episode, we will be diving into his experiences with these medicines, what led him to getting into the business side of psychedelic medicines, what his vision is for the future of conscious, responsible psychedelic use, and much, much more. So please, give me a big hand and welcome my man, Paul Austin, to the show. Paul, my brother, what's up, dude?
What's up, Ryan? That was a great introduction. Thank you for all the attention and energy that you put into that. It's much appreciated.
Oh, you're welcome, man. I mean, it was easy for you. You know, when we connected, I think you were in France when we connected the first time, about a month ago or something like that.
Yeah, on a little summer vacation and traveling in the Pyrenees in the south of France. Yeah.
Yeah. And when I, heard about what you were doing, I was like, it was such a fuck yes from my heart. It was just like, this is exactly what we're doing with Connect with Cannabis. And like what we feel is so necessary in the world right now is for people to stand up and go, hey, I feel something and I want to say it, right? And I want to, then have the science to back it up. Because let's face it, a lot of people are, still inside of materialism. And so a lot of people, to meet them where they're at, they understand science. And so to have that science, to have that spirituality in a grounded state and to be able to actually bring that forth, it's so fucking cool, man. So I'm so stoked to have you here. And I think that, one of the things, like I mentioned in the intro, that I love starting with is, for someone like you, who someone could look at and go, wow, your entire life is psychedelics, right? It's how I look at myself. I'm like, my entire life is cannabis now, right? How did this start for you, right? What was the golden thread that we can follow that led you to who you are today?
I love this as an opening question because it's like you didn't know what you were signing up for. And then when you're, 7 years in, you're like, holy shit, this is taking over everything I do and everything I am. And that's both beautiful and also scary as fuck. So I'm really glad that you acknowledge that. I mean, my story really is, there's a phrase that I once heard, which is, in our wounding is our greatest gift, or in the wound is the gold. It's, a Jung phrase or quote. And for me, my wounding was always isolation and ostracization and sort of a sense of feeling left out or ashamed of who I was. I grew up in a pretty traditional religious family in Michigan, West Michigan, where I was, taught the normal things around drugs and substances, which is, these are illegal because they're bad, and they're bad, which is why they're illegal. And in my late adolescence, mid-teenage years, I started to experiment with cannabis a little bit. And then when I was 19, I had my first psychedelic experience with about 2 grams of psilocybin mushrooms. And then 5 months after that, had my first LSD experience, which was like the real holy shit. This is what this is about. You know, it's just like a total 180 shift in how I viewed reality, how I viewed myself, how I viewed nature, how I viewed, you know, my ancestral lineage and why I am the way that I am. And the core lesson from those early psychedelic experiences was, you know, it was really around life is precious, life is beautiful, life is short. And so don't live by any purpose besides your own. Don't live by any shoulds. Don't live by any prescriptions. Don't live by any sort of conditioning, but instead ask the question, what is it that I want to create with my existence? And if fear does not hold me back, you know, what would that be? Because in that first psychedelic experience, right, that first really meaningful psychedelic experience, I saw through the veil of death. You know, I saw through the veil of ego, so to say. And so there was this enormous capacity that was opened up for choice as a result of that. And so the choice that I made then after graduating from undergrad was to move abroad. You know, I started traveling. I taught English for a year in Turkey. Soon after that, I moved to Thailand, where I built my first online business. And then in 2015, I was living in Budapest and found myself once again doing acid. This time in the hills outside of Budapest in a park called Normafa, overlooking the Danube, with a couple friends, and just kind of came back and revisited like how powerful and beautiful these substances could be. And then as an entrepreneur, started to ask the question, you know, where will this be 5 years from now? Where will this be 10 years from now? And how can I build something in the space that would benefit a lot of people? Because what I landed on was, if we could pull one lever to address the sort of multifaceted existential crisis that we're faced with, that one lever that I would choose to pull would be normalizing responsible psychedelic use to help people wake up, grow up, and show up. And so that's really been the core motivating factor behind everything that I've done. And it's what has led me here today.
I love that, man. It's so cool too, hearing how different people arrived at this point, because for me, I feel, you know, one of the first cannabis experiences I had, which was the first, you know, psychedelic type substance that I interacted with, it gave me the idea of discernment and allowed me to have the direct experience of what discernment was, which was, you know, to look at it now from the eyes I have today, it's like, oh, there is no right or wrong. There is no objective reality. So therefore, discernment is so crucial to your experience of life, because otherwise you're just listening to what other people have discerned or maybe not discerned, and you're living through their lens of life. And in reality, you don't do them or you a service in doing that, because then you're just blindly following something. And I think that it's fine to agree or disagree with someone so long as you've actually taken time to contemplate and discern what is right for you. And I think this is why I'm really excited about quantum physics, because I think this is where science turns psychedelic, you know? So even if someone's like, I don't do psychedelics, right? Well, it's like, okay, cool. Look at quantum physics, and hopefully they're able to. But, you know, I think that, like, you know, that's why I love quantum physics so much. Because for me, science was always like, not boring by any means, but, you know, when you're in school and things like that, like, they don't make science that attractive, you know, but yet science is like something I love so much. But I think quantum physics shows us like a form of science where it's like, whoa, this is wild. We don't know anything going on. It's like a pioneer type way of looking at science. And I think that for me, that's how I look at psychedelics, where, you know, there's so much vastness to this realm. And I feel we're only scratching the surface in terms of like what these are capable to do. I mean, we've seen with phase 3 trials of MDMA and all these things, like, a lot of us knew that we could have a fantastic time at a concert with MDMA, but did we know that it would heal PTSD and heal depression and all these things? I mean, it's just like, it's fascinating how much we still don't know. And I love realms that I can get into that I know I don't know a lot in, you know, because for me, then I get to be in the mind of a child and know that I'm not worried about knowing anything, because I'm in the beginner's mindset, and just be able to be a curious observer. And so I'm curious for you, like, what was the thing that you realized first that you didn't know when you interacted with psychedelics and had that, like, say, first profound experience, right? Like, we'll say the first profound one.
The core reckoning that I had, or recognition, or insight or understanding, was when I grew up in the environment that I grew up in, I internalized a lot of shame. This is pretty natural for a lot of overly religious environments. So you internalize a lot of shame, a lot of guilt for behaviors or practices that are actually very natural and very human. And so when I had those first early experiences with psychedelics, it was almost a recognition that the shame was not mine to hold on to, that in fact, I was not the thing that was wrong, so to say. I was not the thing that needed to feel guilty for being who I was, but instead the sort of culture that I grew up in, which was pretty conservative, for lack of a better word, was conditioning me or throwing all these labels onto me that I essentially had no use for, and that were not relevant to actually who I was. And so having those early then psychedelic experiences, it was like, holy shit. And it wasn't, I mean, there was some anger for sure that came up as a result of that. But also there was a recognition that, oh, and this is why my parents are the way that they are. And this is why their parents are the way that they are. And this is why their parents are the way that they are. Because we are way more a product of the culture that we are raised in than I think most of us realize. You know, there is this sort of thread in Western culture, and particularly American culture, around individualism and, you know, sort of rugged individualism, and that we can go out and be our own thing and be our own person. And, you know, we have full capability and to do whatever. And that is true. I don't want to, we do have agency. We do have choice. We are the creators of our own lives. And, we are also the environments we are born into, the environments in which we surround ourselves are fundamental to who we become. And I think that was the second then awareness that I came into. The first one was that I could let go of all that shame. And the second one was in letting go of all that shame and opening up to how sensitive I was to who are my friends, who am I in relationship with? What am I in relationship with? Because when we work with psychedelics, we come to realize that we are interconnected. We are interdependent with everything around us. And so that was, I would say, the second huge awareness was, if that's the case, then it is my responsibility to take care of the environment around me, to take care of my friends, to take care of my family, because in that taking care, there's a level of reciprocity that comes back to me as well.
That's beautiful, man. And you know what's cool about that too is that really is, I think, tied with the discernment thing I talked about before. For me, for like the biggest breakthrough I've had with psychedelics is the idea of radical ownership and accountability. Like, hey, no one's going to come save the day for me. I get to be the creator of my reality, but with great power comes great responsibility too. So if I'm the creator of my reality, then I can create the most amazing stuff for myself, and I can also create hell on earth for myself too. And there's no one to blame, right? Because I think that's one of the things that stings a lot when I hear about the idea of accountability or radical ownership, is it's like, wait, you mean that it's all up to me? And it's kind of like in Home Alone where he's like, I made my family disappear. I made my family disappear. You know, it's almost like, it's all up to me. Oh my God, it's all up to me. And so I think that's really cool because, you know, I think that the more that we project onto the external world to change or to fix us, the more that we're essentially, just externalizing our power, and we're waiting for everything else to change, and putting the cart before the horse. Because in reality, you know, the external world changes as we change our internal world. And as we, you know, actually get deep enough to ask ourselves, what is our internal world? What do we want it to be? And then project that outward. And it's really interesting, man. Hey, everybody. I hope you're enjoying the show. I wanted to take a quick moment to let you all know that the doors are officially open for the Conscious Cannabis Collective. And as such, this is the last week you can sign up and receive all of the bonuses we're currently including. This is the last time I will be personally onboarding those of you who sign up with a complimentary one-on-one session, and you'll have the ability to get the Grow with Cannabis course for free during this limited time. For more info on how you can take advantage of this offer, head down to the show notes for this episode and secure your spot today, as we only have so many spots left and they are filling up quickly. Now back to the show.
Well, and this is what Nietzsche was talking about when he has this, phrase, God is dead. And if God is dead, and if we come to realize that we are actually, in fact, gods ourselves, which psychedelics often awake us into, they help us see that spark of divinity, then the sort of the burden of that is significant, but also in the willingness to take that burden on is where the greatest freedom comes from. And the phrase that I wrote down as you're talking about this is active nihilism. Like if everything that happens to us is our responsibility, if we are fully and 100% the creators of our own existence, then what are we choosing to create, and who are we choosing to create it for? Because also the thing that then gives life meaning is creating something for other people. In many ways, it's creating something to help others. It's creating something to make the world a better place. It's Steve Jobs had a quote of, the insight that he came to on acid was, if he could do anything with his existence, it would be to create something beautiful that he puts back into the stream of consciousness and the stream of existence. And I think we're only just now waking up to that truth culturally. And it's, I think, partly what's responsible for all the sort of chaos that we're now going through, and even all of the crisis that we're going through, because for the past 10,000 years of human history, we've given our power to gods beyond ourselves. And we're now recognizing that, in fact, we have the skills and the tools to become gods ourselves. And what do we make of that? And how do we handle that? And then what is right and wrong? And then what is, all these other sort of philosophical and metaphysical questions arise as a result of that.
Yeah. It's to me, it's almost synonymous to when you figure out Santa Claus isn't real. And when you think about it too, right? Like, some people have an idea. Some kids have a high idea that Santa Claus isn't real. You always know that kid in second grade is like, dude, Santa Claus isn't real, right? And like, one kid's like shocked and like having a conniption, right? So like, I think that's kind of what happens is, like, for me, I noticed that, I was aware, even from a very young age, that I thought like, the chances of Santa Claus being real, I don't know, but I like the myth of it. And then when I was told he didn't exist, I was like, oh, that's cool. And like, I kind of figured that, but I still want to buy into the whole Christmas spirit because I was a kid and had fun. So I think, like, for a lot of people, I won't say a lot, but for some people, they wake up to that kind of notion that maybe there's more going on here than we're being led to believe. And I think those people, it sounds like both of us being two of those people, just start getting curious about like things like psychedelics. And there's something almost deeper leading us there, because for me, there was a while that the viewpoint I had around cannabis specifically was I bought into the narrative. And then it was actually through anxiety that I found cannabis. And the first time I interacted with it and it hit me the right way, because it takes a couple times of trial and error, I was like, oh my goodness, I have been lied to. And it was actually like a funny thing for me, because I had already kind of suspected it. Like, I had seen some things not add up in the argument that, DARE program and things like that were giving me. But I think that, when you start to wake up to this, you can fall into nihilism. You're like, wait a minute. So nothing's actually real. Everything's just, say, a projection or any of these things. And it reminds me of this quote that really led me, because I never fell into nihilism, but there was a little bit where I was like, what's the point, right? And the quote that I heard that really helped me get out of that was, nothing you do matters, and it's very important you do it. So that like gave me validation for like, yeah, you're right. Nothing you do could matter, but it's very important you do it. And I could lead on to that by saying, or add on to that by saying that what I choose to believe, not based on science, but based on faith, is that we came here for a specific purpose. And there's a funny like analogy that I use for this too. As a coach, like when I'm working with people and they're like, I don't feel like I'm accomplishing enough, X, Y, Z, anxiety, depression, some flaw that society's told them they have and that it's bad, yada, yada, yada. I tell them, I go, well, hey, you're still a human being. And they're like, yeah, so what does that matter? I'm like, think about it. If what everyone and all these spiritual doctrines have said is right about like Earth being a leveling up school, a soul school, and that what a lot of people have been saying recently, like Earth is the hardest school in the universe, well, you're kind of crazy already and elite if you just choose to be a human. Even if you just sit around and watch Netflix your entire life, you still chose to have a soul and emotions and have to distinguish between good and evil and all of these things. So I think like on that nihilism point, that for me, when I like tapped into this deep on acid, for some reason it's acid that gives me like the deepest mental contemplations. And I love LSD. It's like one of my favorite medicines to work with. But it was like, I called it ethereal extreme sporting, right? So like, you know, think about if you're like a new soul, or maybe not a soul, I don't know the exact language, but imagine you're like a newbie. And so like you're watching your friends go down and try this reality thing out, try this Earth thing out. They're coming back. Now think about Earth as synonymous with a psychedelic experience. So they're going down, they're trying Earth out. They're coming back, dude, you got to try it. And you're just like, I'm just going to say no for a while. But eventually you start getting the itch and you're like, all right, I'll take a microdose. So you go down as like a bird, right? Or like an ant, let's say first. You're like, whoa, all right, that did something. Let me check a little bit bigger of a dose. You go down as like an eagle or like a tortoise, right? You're there for 100 years, but you're just observing. Eventually, you're like, fuck it, let's blow the hinges off this thing. I'm going to be a human. And at that point, you're an ethereal extreme sporter. So I've always thought like that kind of helped me in the nihilism point of view, pop out of that and be like, okay, nothing I do matters, and it's very important I do it. And so it's funny you brought that up, because I've definitely had experiences with that. And that's kind of how I help a lot of people that are going down this rabbit hole kind of like at least have some bumper bars to like guide them to wherever they're going to go, you know?
They need that, right? And that has been the role that religion has played to some degree, right? In the past, it has provided those bumpers so that the vast majority of people could still survive and navigate reality, right? And yeah, as we sort of go through this growth and evolution of, like you said, finding at the beginning, you know, we talked about science and psychedelics, or spirit and science is another way that I think about it, right? The future religions, so to say, the future belief systems have to properly balance both. You know, how can we both see and value the sort of precision and understanding that science brings about our reality, while still recognizing that nothing is purely objective, and that this sort of spirit element of existence is crucial to living a happy and meaningful existence.
What is up, everybody? I hope you are all enjoying the show, and I wanted to stop by real quick and share a little bit about our latest podcast sponsor, Freedom Builders. Now, Freedom Builders are a team of graphic designers, website creators, videographers, social media marketing experts, and coaches that build out your custom online business from A to Z. This is a done-for-you service, which means they do the work for you, while you get to put your focus back on what you love most, which is coaching your clients and bringing in sales. Now, as a former online fitness coach, Mike knows where your struggle points are and exactly how to help you overcome them. This is why he created Freedom Builders, so that you can scale your business while protecting your time and your energy. Now, you guys know that delegation is a business superpower, and you can activate this superpower today by scheduling a complimentary call with Mike at freedombuilders.com, so you can start building the freedom that allows you to take your business to the next level. Alex and I recently connected with Freedom Builders for our Connect with Cannabis build-out, and we could not have been happier with the results. With Mike and his team, they were able to go through an outline and create a personalized program for our experience, develop our brand identity, build and design a custom branded webpage, professionally edit our program video content, custom design all of our slide presentations, automate our email marketing sequences, create a seamless payment system for our offer, design unique infographics for our social media content, and guide us through our proven launch blueprint to generate organic leads through our social media. So if you're a coach, facilitator, or healer listening to this ad right now, and you are looking to put freedom back into your life, once again, go to freedombuilders.com and book your complimentary call today. I hope you all enjoy the rest of the show, and I'm wishing you the best day ever. The idea of like this balance, right? And we see it in yin and yang. We see it if you're looking at Paul Chek, the 4 doctors, the 7 chakras. Like there's this system around everything that's based on like ultimately creating some sort of harmony and balance within said system. And I think that whenever, just like a video game character, right? If you're playing Need for Speed and you put all your points when you're making a car in acceleration and you don't have any handling, well, yeah, you might be able to get off the line fast, but as soon as a corner comes, everyone else who didn't put all their points on acceleration and has some traction and braking is able to actually go around you. And so I think like, that's one of the slippery slopes, is that when we look at like science, when we look at like intellectualism and knowing things, when we look at creativity, art, like all these different areas, it's really easy to get kind of like lost in the sauce and focus on one. And I think that's what things like meditating, breath work, of course, but definitely psychedelics do really well. And I think for me, people ask me often, like, why do you think psychedelics could be necessary in someone's life? Because I'm not going to say they are by any means, but if someone is the right person for a psychedelic experience, if they've discerned that they're right for them in their life, what is the point of it? And for me, it's that, for me, they can be like a rocket ship to get to the same destination that many other rivers can lead you to. But it's almost like, if we use the river analogy, it's like taking a tube down it and doing the lazy river, or taking a speedboat down it. Now, the challenge is that just because you take a speedboat down it does not mean there's no inherent risks added because you're in a speedboat, right? Like if you crash, you could potentially get really messed up. Whereas on a lazy river, you're going to have much more time to look around you and make sure there's like nothing coming that's going to like hurt you or things like that. But if you're driving with a trained trainer for that speedboat, well, then your risk significantly goes down versus if you're driving yourself. Doesn't mean that you can't drive it yourself. Maybe just decide to go a little slower, right? And things like that. But I think that the more that you're able to get into the psychedelic experience in a safe manner, the more you're able to have the direct experience of why balance matters, of why, this spirit thing that, has almost been, I wouldn't say forgotten about, it hasn't been forgotten about, but it's been twisted into a scientific way of looking at things for so long that, like, there's almost this feeling, at least for me, that for the first time in my life, when I experienced that, it was like, wow, I don't know anything about that. And I'm okay with that, because to me, that is one of the best aspects of life, is mystery. And so if I'm going around trying to figure out everything, that was like the thirst trap that blew open for me when I did psychedelics and really broke through, specifically on acid. First time it really happened was like, why do I care about knowing anything? I was staring at the stars, looking into the vast mystery that is very synonymous with the internal mystery. And I wasn't worried about trying to figure out what constellation is that, what's up there. I was just in awe of the stars. And I remembered that quote from the Bible, if you want to enter the kingdom of heaven, you must first enter the mind of a child. And it really like allowed me to have the direct experience of that. And remember being a kid where I wasn't so worried about knowing things. I wasn't so worried about having everything figured out. I was just happy to be there. And I think that's one of the things that, spirit directly correlates to, is that for me, when I'm really attached into my soul and feeling the spirit run through me, I'm just encapsulated in mystery. I'm experiencing synchronicity and I'm all like, how did that happen? I'm just like, oh my God, that was wild. And so I think for me, like, that's been the biggest thing that like infusing more spirit into my life has done. And I think that the cool thing about this is that I think one of the other things that psychedelics have done for me anyway, which kind of sounds counterintuitive because they're not exactly simple, right, in nature, right? They have a lot of different compounds to them and different interactions. But what they give you is like the simplicity within like something complex. And what I mean by that is like, what I realized is that I think the universe, God, source, whatever you want to call it, aka us, essentially, like the source that we individually emanate from is simply playing a big game of warmer, colder with us. So like, you talk about synchronicity, it's like, that means you're getting warmer. Feeling out of alignment, you're getting colder. And it's like these kind of like simplistic things. I think the farther out I go, the more simple the statements and talents I get are. And I found that really funny as well.
And a lot of what you're talking about too is what I love to track it back to is neurobiology, right? And the neurobiology of psychedelic experiences. So, you mentioned feeling or experiencing the mind of a child and, being able to sort of, even this last one, it was like pinging a signal amidst all the noise, right? When it comes to synchronicity and the sort of warmer versus colder. And it constantly reminds me of, in Taoism, there's this concept called the middle way, where in the middle way, we're not trying to go too far left. We're not trying to go too far right. We're not trying to go too dark. We're also not trying to go too light. We're not trying to go too, it's like, what is that balancing point? What is that middle way? And when we work with psychedelics, there's a way in which our brains, which in many ways our brain is the hardware for existence, I would say, our brains reflect that middle way, because normally, especially in Western culture, with people who have been, raised in Western culture, we're very linear. We're very this, right? We're very much sort of in a get shit done mode. And so I always forget which hemisphere of the brain it is, but it's one specific hemisphere of the brain, left or right, that is much more linear and sort of focused on getting things done. And yet the other hemisphere of our brain around art and creativity and voice and just sort of the experience of being is often not very activated. And so when a lot of people who have been raised in this environment work with psychedelics for the first time, as you were mentioning, the clouds part, they can see the top of the mountain. They realize that something beyond their meaningless, materialist lifestyle actually exists. And then all of a sudden they're inspired to meditate more often. They're inspired to do breath work. They're inspired to start some sort of ritual or prayer or be more involved in ceremony, because they realize it gets them back to that middle way, right? It gets them back to that experience of presence. It gets their so they've actually shown this with fMRI scans and psychedelics, where the two hemispheres of the brain actively communicate when we're on particularly high doses of psychedelics, which is also why we experience something called synesthesia, right? Where we can smell colors or we can taste music. And so that, I think, in itself is a beautiful representation of finding balance. And so sort of back to your point that you even sort of kicked off with, which was, like, should everyone do this? Does everyone need to do this? Clearly it's not appropriate for some folks, people who are predisposed to schizophrenia, people who already see through the veil, people who might have a family history of X, Y, and Z. And certainly the vast majority of people could likely benefit from some sort of psychedelic use. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be high doses, 7 grams of psilocybin mushrooms. It might just be a microdose. It might just be a microdosing protocol. It could be some sort of supplementation regimen. And this gets back to psychedelics have a myriad number of benefits, right? It's a long list of benefits. And, the mystical experience, the connection to God, the transcendence, all of that is very critical and key. And not everyone has the capacity to hold that complexity. And when I often talk about this, I think about a Terence McKenna talk from Esalen. So McKenna published this collection of talks that he gave, and it's all in a book called The Archaic Revival, which was published before Food of the Gods. It's a phenomenal book about a lot of McKenna's early talks in the 70s and 80s. And so McKenna's giving a talk at Esalen, and Ralph Metzner, who's another OG from the 60s. Metzner was paired up with Richard Alpert and Timothy Leary when they were doing early experience with acid. He's a German psychoanalyst. He passed away a few years ago. Ralph Metzner is attending this talk with Terence McKenna, and Ralph stands up and he asks, "Hey, Terence, what do you think about everyone doing psychedelics? Do you think everyone would benefit from it?" And Terence McKenna said, "Probably not. It's probably just 5 to 10% of people who will truly and significantly benefit from working with high doses of psychedelics, because the vast majority of people don't actually have the capacity to handle what might come up in that psychedelic experience." And of course, in the 80s, microdosing wasn't a thing yet. So McKenna really didn't have a context or sense of microdosing, but that's the way that I've always looked at it. So 10% of people could benefit from these really high dose, these mystical experiences, this awakening process, if you will. But 90% of people could benefit from microdosing, just like 90% of people could benefit from taking fish oil. 90% of people could benefit from taking creatine. 90% of people could benefit from taking any other supplementation, because microdoses are anti-inflammatory. They help with cognition. They help with mood. They help with energy, right? And so there's a way, again, where we can hit that both and, because in many ways, that's what you're speaking to, is psychedelics give us that capacity to hold the paradox of existence, the both and. It's just a matter of what's appropriate for whom and when.
That makes perfect sense. And that's exactly how I view it. And I'm glad you brought up the middle way, because the statement I normally think of when I think about this is Ram Dass: no matter how enlightened you get, you still need to take out the trash. That's the middle way. right? It's like also be here now. Another perfect statement that encapsulates like, hey, you signed up for this experience, be here now. And it's very synonymous with like, if you go to Six Flags, right? Or just something, right? That's the first one that came to my head. If you go to Six Flags and you're there and you went there to have fun and ride rides, and then you're sitting there on your cell phone the entire time thinking about what you're going to do after, it's kind of the same thing. It's like, hey, no diss, but like, did you pay for this for no reason? Like, why are you here if you just wanted to hang out on your cell phone all day? And so I think like it's this idea of presence. It's like you can peek behind the veil, and that can definitely help. I mean, it's definitely helped me. Like you said, definitely not for everyone. It depends on how far out they really want to go. And honestly, what is useful for their soul? I mean, I believe that if we are infinite beings, and who knows if we have past lives and future lives, or if it's just parallel timelines or whatever. But I think that it's some people's lifetime to not know that. It might be their experience of source wanting to not remember itself, right? And go through life like that. And then there's ultimately equal amount of realities where source wants to remember that it's source and still be a human, right? And so like there's like, if there is infinite different emanations of these individual emanations of source, then I think what I've found is that nothing is for everyone, because again, there's no objectiveness in reality. But I think that like you were saying with Terrence talking about whether or not psychedelics were good for everyone, or specifically big doses, because that's what he was referring to at that time, like you were saying, I think it's the same idea as a race car, right? Like if you get a really fast car and you want to go from point A to point B, sure, you might be able to get there faster than from a Honda Civic. But if you don't know how to handle that car, well, that could be devastating. And so I think for a lot of people, it's just understanding like, for me, what I've realized is that when I got into psychedelics, of course, we were both, in younger years when we got into psychedelics, we didn't know what we knew now about, psychology, neurobiology, all these types of things, right? And I'm not saying that you have to know those things, because I think that would be naive in a way, because I didn't know those things and I still turned out okay. But I think that, I feel as though I was fortunate enough to have my first large doses with the people that I felt safe with in a mindset that actually felt good to me. But I think for a lot of people, they might try their first heroic dose of acid at a music festival. And it's really a Russian roulette, whether or not that ends up positive or negative. And I don't think there's any negative experience objectively, but I think there's an experience in which you didn't learn the lesson of how that happened for you. And that can be very traumatizing for people. And what Hamilton Souther, a good buddy of mine, says a lot is that with ayahuasca, the shaman will literally tell you, if you come out and you're like, this trip was terrible and it traumatizes you, they'll literally tell you, you got to go back into the medicine space and kind of like make closure with it. And that can be
clear it.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And that can be traumatizing for people too. Because think about it this way. It's almost like, to use the car analogy again, if you get in a car wreck, what's the number one way to liberate yourself from the trauma of that? Along with, of course, physical therapy and those kind of things, getting back in a car and realizing that every time you get in one, you're not necessarily going to have that crash. And so like, it's terrifying. But I think that's one of the reasons why, it's so important to have individuals like yourself speaking to this, because I think when psychedelics specifically, really any realm, is demonized for so long and then climbs in popularity so quick, and not just popularity, right? Because we had that in the 60s. We had popularity starting, but I'm talking popularity with credence. So with John Hopkins and all of these very prestigious organizations that resonate and meet the people that would usually diss these things or maybe not be in alignment with them, and meets them where they're at, because now science is behind it. Whenever we have that type of, down and up so quickly, I think a lot of people can fail to use discernment and just pick up like, this is definitely going to be good for me. And I think that, I'm similar to you. I think most people could benefit from some amount of psychedelic experience, but whether that's 0.1 of mushrooms for a month in their life and that's it, or whether or not that's doing ayahuasca 100 times, or whether or not that's doing ayahuasca once, or doing a gram of mushrooms, like who knows what it is, right? But I think that's where education comes in. And that's like one of the many reasons I was so excited to dive in with you, because you guys are literally doing this. And it's so important to have different voices out there, because as well as I do, I can speak till I'm blue in the face about these kind of things, and it might not resonate with someone. They might resonate with your message, or vice versa, or like any of the facilitators you have on your website, right? Like one of those guys might not reach someone who some other girl does. There's any of these things. So I think the more ways we can say the same thing but through different language and through different perspectives, the more people we're going to be able to reach. And I think that the foundation of it is discernment, right? It's being able to decide, is this right for me, right? Not, is this good based on what so-and-so says, or did this change so-and-so's life? But do I feel this like a calling within me? Because if not, it doesn't mean you never do it, but it might just not be the right time right now. And like a crock pot, if you want to eat chili and it's only been cooking for 2 hours, you probably don't want to eat it, or you're going to be hanging out with Sal, Mr. Manila, And so like these kind of things are really important to be able to use that discernment and choose if we're doing it for us or because someone else said it.
And this often comes back to intuition, right? And how well you trust yourself, how developed is your intuition. And oftentimes, before people work with psychedelics, their intuition has been totally shut down. They've been gaslighted by culture not to trust themselves, not to believe themselves, not to listen to themselves. And so oftentimes their intuitive capacities are first woken up through psychedelic work. And so it's a bit of a catch-22 in that a lot of people are looking for that awakening, so to say, to better listen to themselves. And yet they don't have the greatest tool, or they haven't yet worked with one of the greatest tools that might be available for them to do it, which speaks all the more to the importance of education, destigmatization, the research that's coming out on psychedelics. And then, another, I'm taking copious notes as you're kind of going through, because I like to come back and find the tie through all of this. This is what happens when two podcast hosts get on and start.
I got my notebook
going
too.
Back and forth. The other thing that you were sort of speaking to is the importance of set and setting, which I'm sure your listeners have heard before, right? What is the mindset going into the experience, and then what is the actual physical setting of that experience? And again, one of the core reasons that the 60s went the way that it did is because it was the first time that psychedelics were reintroduced into Western culture in over almost 2,000 years, right? And so we had no frame, no model, so to say, for what even set and setting was, because we hadn't worked with these psychoactive substances in so many, in 2 millennia, basically. And yet when you visit indigenous groups of people, the Shipibo or the Bwiti or the Mazatec, or, anyone who has had a lineage that's passed down with, they've been working with psychoactive substances. And even if they haven't been working with deep plant medicines necessarily, the indigenous way of being clearly recognizes the importance of set and setting, clearly recognizes how critical it is to prime oneself, to prepare oneself, to ensure that the space is not only clean physically, but clean spiritually as well, from entities, from other sort of any weird shit that might want to come in. Because if it's not, then there could be a trauma, right? And that's what you're speaking to with the trauma imprint. We go into an experience, maybe the provider's a little creepy, or maybe the medicine is way too much, right? Because sometimes with ayahuasca, they mix in Toei, or they mix in belladonna, or they mix in these other things. So the trauma imprint then, even when working with psychedelics, will then need to be cleared through another catharsis. And so all of this, generally what it speaks to is what I call the skill of psychedelics. Because when we often think about psychedelics, we just think of it as a drug, or we think of it as a medicine, or we think of it as a substance that maybe I try once or twice. I have this experience, and then I go back into my everyday life. And what I have continued to encourage people to think about is, what if psychedelic use was a skill, right? What if it was something that you could, learn, you could cultivate, you could become better at? And the incentive of becoming, quote unquote, better at working with psychedelics is it becomes easier to manifest and create what it is that you want to create. So back to what we were talking about at the beginning, right? We are the fundamental creators of our own life. External circumstances do not hold us back. And the more skillful that we can become at working with these really magical tools, because they are magical tools, then the easier it is for us to manifest and create the existence that we see ourselves becoming and stepping into. And so the way that I've often thought about the psychedelics then is, how do we calibrate between high doses, which is the classic mystical experience? How do we set that North Star? What's our purpose and vision? the microdoses or the mini doses, which allow us to have a little bit of a sort of elevation, if you will. They sort of lubricate that path of becoming an evolution with non-psychedelic modalities, breathwork, yoga, meditation, which is the foundation, right? The fundamental of any sort of practice or any existence of presence, harmony, love, beauty, and finding the calibration between those two and understanding when is appropriate is key to the skill of psychedelics. Because what you and I know is if you go and you do a bunch of acid, but you don't actually start a meditative practice, you don't have any breath work, or you're not doing yoga, all of those insights just dissipate and you don't actually change at all. Mm-hmm. And the core of psychedelic work is how do we go from altered states to altered traits? You know, how do we go from having these insights about the nature of existence to actually weaving and integrating those insights into who we're becoming? Otherwise, it's just disassociation or escape or a distraction, a waste of time. And you and I both know plenty of people. I mean, you mentioned the 100 ayahuasca ceremonies before. There are plenty of people I know who have been doing ayahuasca for 25 years, and there's not really that much has actually changed about them, which also, kind of just to finish this last point, speaks to the importance of a coach or a therapist or a community, right? Because there's one aspect that, yeah, psychedelics can help catalyze behavioral change. But then there's also another aspect of you need accountability. You need to make that choice. You need to make that decision. And so it sort of comes back to that's the role of the shaman. So to say that's the role of the therapist, that's the role of the coach, is to help continue to, from a coaching framework, help to continue to push you, to help you grow, to help you live uncomfortably so you're not held back by the normal restrictions of everyday reality.
Yeah, that was beautifully said. And I think that, the universe speaks to me in analogies, so I pull them out whenever they pop in. And I think that, if we look at like a mortar firework, right? The ones that like you light, they have the big wick, they go boom. And then you think it might be over, but pop, right? So I think that like the PEAK, peak experience of like actually doing the psychedelic is the boom, right? But you don't want it to actually just die out there because what was it? It was just a sound then. And I think that, integration is really that allowing of like the full spectacle that we know to be a firework that makes us all feel giggly inside, right? And I think that, on the challenging side of things too, like if we are interacting with psychedelics, these can be pretty rough on the body, right? Like, a lot of these experiences can be rough. And so anytime we're doing that, we're disintegrating from our normal lease on reality. And so there is like a certain amount of risk there. And I think that if you're not integrating, you're not really using these, things as medicines or teachers, you're using them as a substance. And where I'm not here to judge how people use them, I am here to say that, first of all, I know what I choose discernment wise, because I know the challenges that can come along in the psychedelic space, especially if you're not integrating. At best, you're just, like you said, not capturing the lesson or the wisdom that the plant taught you. At worst, they can actually traumatize you. They can throw you off and uncalibrate you for a little while. It takes you a little bit of time to come back into the container and like remember and capitulate who the hell you are. And I think that, for a lot of people, the misnomer is that the psychedelic experience is the work. But I think that's just the beginning. That's when you get the textbook. And then it's up to you to still read it afterwards. And I think that's exactly what you were saying is the coach, therapist, shaman role to allow you to go. And I love what you said about like altered states to altered traits. That's like one of the best ways I've ever heard that put. So game recognized game for that one. But I think like, that is the perfect way to say it. Like
I didn't make that up. Yeah. I just want to say that.
You owned it.
I'll take it.
You owned it though. So
yeah, totally.
That's Paul's statement. Now we're saying it.
Yeah.
And I think that like, again, I think the point of psychedelics, if there is a goal, right? At least for me, I'll make it subjective. For me, I want my entire life to feel like a psychedelic experience, and not necessarily all the ups and downs, but like the breakthrough. I want as much of that in my typical day-to-day reality as I can. And so I think for me, what made integration go from homework to like my passion project was in that realization, like, oh, this is how I can trip all the time without having to rely on the medicines and becoming dependent on all of those things, especially with things like cannabis, right? Which are widely used more commonly and more often. I think those are the kind of medicines where it gets shaky. And that's why I've focused in cannabis, because I think for a lot of people, And we do know people that have done ayahuasca many more times than, at least from me looking in, they might have needed. Maybe they're not doing the integration, which again, no judgment, just curious, observant. But I think that, with things like cannabis, so many people, including myself, we just fall into daily use of it. And that's not inherently bad, but the question is why, right? Are you dealing with something like really challenging anxiety and cannabis is helping you and you're going into it intentionally and taking notes and then like integrating it and only going back to the medicine when you have another why, not the same why or not even a why in general, but just, I don't know, I smoke every night, so I'm just smoking that, I guess. It's like, I think that, again, because everything goes in and out, right? Like from in to out. Because again, like, I think that, as above, so below, that thing really makes a lot of sense in hermetic laws with regards to psychedelics. I think that you're not respecting yourself when you're doing that, and therefore you're not respecting the medicine, and I think that like when you have that type of relationship, the plants kind of know too, right? Or the substance knows. It's kind of like, this person's a little shaky. I can't really show them the real deal here, and I think that as soon as you start asking why and you start engaging and communicating with the medicine, at least for me, my whole experience of it changed. And now, especially with cannabis, which is my most prevalent plant ally in my life, I feel that the medicine is in me all the time. Even if I'm taking months off at a time, I feel like I can still commune with that plant. And whether that's actually real or whether it's just something that my brain chemistry is making up, who knows? It doesn't matter. It's like when people go, that's just the placebo effect. I go, oh, you mean the idea of the body healing itself? Yeah, nothing to see here. It's like, how is that an afterthought? How is it like, oh, that could just be the placebo effect, as if that's not the actual goal, right? I think everything, whether it's psychedelics, whether it's breath work, whether it's whatever, is pointing us back to the idea that, hey, you're much more powerful than you've been told you are. And I think that if you end up putting the power onto the plants, the only way I can access that is through the plants, then you miss, in my opinion, the biggest lesson they have to teach you, which is like, hey, same way Jesus said, like everything I can do, you can do and better. And I think that's one of the leading teachings that I go on when I go into these experiences, not so I don't respect them and their power, because they are extremely powerful, but I think they probably feel a little clinged on to when people were like giving them all this credit of like, that's the only way I can access it. They're like, sure, if you want to believe that, but that's pretty disempowering, because then you need me to access it. And that's, again, like what religion did. Well, you can't talk to God, but luckily we have this guy here, and if you pay us money, you can talk to him and he can commune with God, right? So it's kind of like, I think the beauty of psychedelics is they can give you that experience that, oh, I don't need any mediator to be able to talk to whatever you call it, higher self, quantum realm, God, source, universe, whatever you choose to call it. I don't need anything to communicate with that. I even don't need the medicines after a certain point, maybe until the next why. And I think that's what Terrence, said so beautifully when he said, when you get the message, you can hang up the phone, at least for a little while. And I think the more people that are aware that's a thing, the more that we can start educating people on the fact that, like, yeah, these medicines are amazing. I love them. And they've been a huge, huge ally in my life, but I'm also learning from them because I want to be able to learn what they know how to do, and I think that's really cool.
It's almost like the analogy or the metaphor. I mean, talking about metaphors and analogies, it's like Dumbo's feather, where Dumbo thought he couldn't fly. He thought he needed his little feather to fly.
Yes.
And then all of a sudden his feather went away and he realized that he could still fly. And I think it goes back to what we were talking about before, which is psychedelics often open up the awareness of the capacity that we have because it's been so shut down for so long for so many of us. In fact, there's another funny sort of anecdote from a book that was published a few years ago. It's called The Secret Drugs of Buddhism by Mike Crowley. And in that book, he writes about how so in the book, he talks about how, it was like something like 30 or 40 of the sort of predominant Buddhist teachers now today started their path because of psychedelics. And there's only one person in the book that he interviewed that said that was not the case. And it turned out after the fact that person was lying to save face. So there's also a deep sense of, teachers like Jack Kornfield and Sharon Salzberg and, these predominant people who teach meditation and spiritual awakening. They all started their own path through psychedelics. Sam Harris was much the same way as well, where he talks about his acid experiences in Pokhara. And so it really opens up that capacity, like you said, to realize that we have choice, to realize we have agency, while remembering that psychedelics are non-specific amplifiers, right? To go back to the placebo effect, is what we know from clinical research is that psychedelics are way more effective than just a placebo. But what we also know from clinical research is that someone's going to easily know if they take a placebo or a psychedelic. That will be immediately clear. So there's really, when we talk about discernment, there's not a really easy way to discern then this sort of trade-off of psychedelics versus a placebo. And like you said, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter, because if we realize that we have the power within ourselves to shift and change our own reality, then we don't need to give up that power to a plant ally outside of ourselves. We can leverage that plant ally. We can engage and have a relationship with that plant ally, but it doesn't need to necessarily become a parasitic relationship or experience. And you know, you mentioned cannabis, and I know a lot of what you've done has been specific to cannabis. And this has been my own challenge or struggle with cannabis, is it's a very seductive ally in that way, because it isn't as intense as taking a bunch of mushrooms necessarily. It's easy to smoke a joint or a spliff or take an edible. It's now more than ever reasonably accepted as well, and less stigmatized. And so I always would rationalize, hey, I don't really drink alcohol that much. You know, it's nice to have a little bit of cannabis here and there. But what I came to realize is I was just sort of utilizing cannabis to replace intimacy, you know, specifically female connection. And in the last year or so, I've started dating someone quite seriously. And so as a result of that, my cannabis use has basically plummeted. You know, like in the last few months, I've maybe done it a handful of times. I'm totally content now. I don't feel any sort of impulse or pull to do it. And it doesn't mean I'm quitting cold turkey and never going to do it again. It just means I've sort of finally, I mean, this has been years in the making. It's been probably 4 or 5 years in the making. This has been the case. I finally found myself able to create that spaciousness so that way I can, you know, be a lot more present and aware. Because what I came to realize is cannabis was fucking with my mood when I would do it that often. I was having issues with mood regulation. I would get easily upset. I was relying on it for sleep. And in some ways, I had come to cannabis many years ago because it was actually helpful for my depression and anxiety. And then I did all this work in my 20s to resolve that, but I still was sort of on a lot of cannabis. And now that I'm off of it, I've come to realize that I have no issues of depression. I have very little anxiety. And that the issue the last few years has, in fact, been cannabis itself. And so it's nice to sort of come back to that full circle where integration and integrating all these aspects of who I am through the psychedelic work has allowed me to be now totally free and have the choice and decision to work with plant allies when I want to work with plant allies, and not necessarily feel compelled to rely on them for my sense of well-being, if you will.
Yeah, you know, I talk about this a lot with Connect with Cannabis. You know, cannabis thinks it's pretty strange too when you're codependent. You know, like she's like, I don't know, right? I don't know about this. But when you can go from codependency to a power couple dynamic, which what is a power couple, right? It's the difference between I need you and I want you. And, you know, romantic movies might make it sound like really attractive. I need you. I can't live without you. But if you're living with someone who like literally is like, I cannot live without you, it gets really strange real quick because it puts a lot of pressure on you. Because then if you look at them the wrong way and they think you're going to break up with them and all these things, right? So I think that when you're able to go into a power couple dynamic, it's like, I want you when I want you. And I could live without you, but in this moment, I'm choosing not to because it feels right now. You know, and I think that like that for me has helped a lot in my relationship with cannabis, because what I realized early on was like, well, I can't say the plant held a gun to my head and made me interact with it. So it leaves like the equation to me. So why did I feel the need to go into it so heavy? And what I was feeling, or what I found, was that the plant was supporting me with feelings of comfort, which for someone living in discomfort is very addictive, you know? And I think that over time, you know, cannabis, it can deplete you in certain minerals like potassium and magnesium and things like that. And I think that's,
and testosterone as well. It can also lower testosterone if used too often.
Absolutely. And so I think, like, again, awareness is key with this, because I think a lot of people would do better if they knew better, but they just don't know. And that's really what I sought to create with Connect with Cannabis is like the long lost cannabis user manual, because again, if you're driving a car and you don't know what the shifter does and you don't know there's a heater and whatever, and it's freezing out, you're like, man, I wish there was some type of fire in here, and you just don't know you could turn the heater on. It's like it would help a lot if you read the user manual and you're like, oh, that's what that knob does. Oh my God, problem solved. And so I think that like being able to look at every psychedelic like this, because I think that right now we're getting a lot more info on things like mushrooms and MDMA specifically, but I think that we're still only scratching the surface of what these things can do and like kind of the full spectrum approach to them. But I think that like one of the things I've noticed also, to go back a little bit farther, is that, my ability to tap into breath work, meditating, whatever, has gotten so much stronger as I've done psychedelics and then been able to integrate them. Like every morning I go out of my deck right in the sun and I do 3 rounds of breath work. And I remember when I would do breath work, and I would barely get, like when I would do my little quick hold and squeeze, I would get barely anything. But now I actually get nervous when I do the hold and squeeze, because I go so deep that sometimes I like end up on the ground, like I'm sitting down, but I end up like
passing out, blacking out.
Coming back in, like I don't even know who I am, what this experience, like nothing, like complete blank slate. And so like, it's really interesting how, if you're able to integrate, that's what I'm saying. Like, I barely need anything in a sober state now to have a psychedelic experience. I mean, just like, when you're on your path and you get to do what you love to, you get synchronicities fucking everywhere. And some days completely sober, I'm like, am I tripping? What is happening right now? A famous example I bring up is, I have a couple, but the craziest one was I was at a music festival, 50,000 people halfway across the country, and found a guy while I was tripping on acid. Actually, this happened, that lived on the same street as me in Boston. It was the weirdest thing I've ever encountered. And I'm just like, what the hell is that? Right. But I think those are just like, again, those warmer, colder cues, and so it's really interesting. Mm-hmm. And so, Paul, this has been amazing, dude. I got to have you back on for round 2. I feel like we just scratched the surface in this epic dialogue that we're going to create here, or that we did create here. But I want to make sure I give you ample opportunity to tell people where they can find you, where they can find your projects, your podcast. Tell the people where they can reach you, man.
So the thirdwave.co is the main website. paulaustin.co is my personal website. We have a microdosing course. If we have a mushroom grow kit, if people want to buy a grow kit to help grow their own mushrooms. We have a podcast, Third Wave Podcast, which you will be a guest on reasonably soon in the next couple of weeks. And then for any other, if anyone's a facilitator or a coach or wants to become a coach, we also have a training program for coaches where we go deep into the skill of psychedelics. And that's a 6-month training program as well for anyone who wants to check that out. And it's all on the thirdwave.co. And then socials, Paul Austin 3W on the gram and Twitter. That's where I spend most of my time on social. And that'll about do it. I mean, I just appreciate you doing this and making this a thing, and love the dynamic and dialogue that we got into. It was a ton of fun just to riff for an hour. So I appreciate you creating this platform, Ryan.
Oh, you're so welcome, man. I think I was telling you before I hit record, it almost feels illegal how much fun I have, especially on this podcast. I have 2, exactly. But, and the other one is super fun too, highly optimized. But this one is just, it's my life, So, how that feels, right? Like when it's your life, it's all you want to do. And so being able to continue having my horizons broadened by different voices and different, ideas and different things allows me to grow deeper and deeper into what I feel is truly me. And it's so much fun, dude. And so I have one last question for you, Paul, and that is this. Let's say someone listens to this conversation and they're interested to explore the idea of psychedelic medicines in their own life. What is the one piece of advice that Paul Austin would suggest to them to allow them to use proper discernment in choosing if these medicines are right for them in their life?
What I often come back to is listening and stillness and presence. So be present with whatever's coming up, tune inwards to listen to what it is that's there, and find the stillness and spaciousness to be able to do both of those things.
I love that. Being present is a present. All righty, guys. When I first connected with Paul, it was as if we had known each other already for quite some time, and we're picking up right where we had left off in a previous lifetime. It is in these types of connections that I am reminded of the language of synchronicity, and how when I pay attention to these serendipitous moments, I not only feel more alive than ever, but I feel as though I am inching closer and closer to something. What this something is, in my opinion, is the awe and wonder surrounding the deep mystery that we are all encapsulated in during our human experience. And for me, this is my favorite high of all time, and the one that allows me to feel the most connected to myself, those around me, and the world at large. For any of you who tuned into this episode who are looking to take the deep dive into Paul's world, find out more about synthesis and third wave, listen to his podcast, and stay up to date on all of the amazing creations he is putting out into the world, make sure to take a leisurely stroll down to the show notes of this episode, where I will be listing all of the fastest ways to buy the ticket and take the ride directly into his world. Paul, thank you so much for sharing your time, experience, and wisdom on the show today, for doing the important work you are doing in the world to be a protector of these sacred medicines and be the change the world of psychedelics is craving at this moment in time, and most importantly, for allowing those you serve to remember to have fun in their process of life, as I truly believe that laughter is the best medicine, and is the medicine we can give to each other from an infinitely abundant source at any time. And until next time, my brother, may your journey be smooth and full of light. Aho.